5 minutes or however, just about your thoughts on where we are today, the impact of this midterm election, and with our HBCUs. So first we have Alyssa Canty, Director of Youth Programs with Common Cause. Alyssa joined Common Cause, North Carolina in May of 2015, working with students at Fayetteville State, North Carolina Central, that's my mom's alma mater, St. Augustine's, and Shaw Universities. She earned her Bachelor of Arts degrees in Women's Studies and Public Policy from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and received a certificate in not-for-profit management from Salem College and a Master's of Public Administration from North Carolina Central University. Alyssa worked with such organizations as Breakthrough Atlanta, Shoulder Education Foundation, Lillian's List, Planned Parenthood of Central North Carolina, and the LGBT Center of Raleigh. Let's give a warm Next we have Courtney R. Snowden. Courtney is a DC native, seasoned government relations professional, boy mom of Malik and Maxwell, Peloton enthusiast, and founder of Black Girl Magic, the Peloton edition. I need to know more about that. Snowden is the founder and president of the Blueprint Strategy Group, a boutique government and public affairs shop in Washington, D.C. She served her hometown as the deputy mayor for greater economic opportunity in Washington, D.C., appointed by Mayor Muriel Bowser in April of 2015. A sixth-generation Washingtonian, Courtney was charged with rebuilding and revitalizing the district's overlooked and underserved communities, with a focus on workforce and economic development and small businesses. An accomplished political strategist, Courtney lobbied for the firm's corporate and nonprofit clients, including Google, MasterCard, Airbnb, the National Urban League, the National Education Association, and Time Warner Cable. And that's just a brief part of her bio. Let's welcome Ms. Courtney R. Snowden. And finally, we have Dr. Kenesha Grant, professor, author, media contributor, and friend. You're my bad. Dr. Kenesha has a passion for education and politics that was born out of her early experiences growing up in South Florida. Raised by a single mother, she quickly learned that getting an education and understanding the political process would be the keys to a better life for herself and her community. A first-generation college graduate, Kenesha earned a bachelor's in political science and master's in public administration at Florida A&M University, FAMU. As a graduate student, Kenesha was appointed to the Florida Governor's Access and Diversity Committee, where she was instrumental in the conception and passage of legislation that led to Florida's first-generation matching grant. Kenesha joined the faculty of Howard University as an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science in 2014. In 2020, she earned a promotion to the rank of associate professor with tenure. At Howard, she teaches courses in American politics with focus on subnational politics. Her research interests include American political parties, American political government, and subnational politics. And she's particularly interested in the political impact of Black migration on American politics. Her first book is entitled The Politics of the 20th Century, and it describes how Black migration to northern cities reshaped those political environments. Let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Kenesha. And we have so many issues. We talk about these elections, these midterm elections coming up in 2 weeks. But first, we want to just allow each of you an opportunity just to give a statement. So we can start with you, Ms. Alyssa Canty.
Make sure it's on. Thank you all for having me. I'm just really excited to be here at Howard. It's my actual first time on your campus, but I think this election cycle is super important because we saw in 2020 how, due to the pandemic, they expanded vote by mail, they expanded all of these great things, and then all of a sudden this past legislative session, a lot of those laws were attempted to be overturned. And so we have a lot of open seats in legislatures across the country. So this is like our time to make sure that not only is voting accessible, but that we can have confidence when we cast our ballot and that we have protections to make sure that we don't have to be concerned about cities and their mail systems not being able to handle the high traffic. Like I know nearby Baltimore, they have a lot of issues with their mail system. We also have campuses that are split, like in North Carolina. And the only way that we can make sure that all of those different issues that were listed out, gerrymandering, having early voting that is not just like a few days, but weeks, having voting hours that include Sunday voting, because Black voters most likely use Sunday voting and working class voters need Sunday and Saturday voting hours. All of those needs are controlled by our general assemblies across the country. So whether you're a student at Howard voting in DC or voting in other states, I had a conversation with students that were like, honestly, I vote by mail because I want to vote my hometown, but like it's complicated. No one on my campus is telling me when I have to request a mail ballot, when I need to turn it in, do I need to have it notarized? Do I have to have a witness? Like voting laws when it comes to vote by mail is different in every single state. And so all that information to be able to be easily found on your Secretary of State website. But we have states like Mississippi whose Secretary of State websites can't even handle a student looking up their address to see where they vote. I know we work with students in Mississippi and their addresses for their campus all come up as invalid addresses, although these campuses are hundreds of years old, so it makes no sense. So I think, this election, knowing that our Secretary of States are on the ballot, our state representatives, our state senators, all of those people are on the ballot, we must turn out the vote, and we must also make sure that they realize how important the student vote is and the Black student vote. I know this is one of those elections where you do see your like Congress members coming to campuses and telling you like making promises and like trying to reach and get your vote. But like once you vote for them, it's important for you not to just stop on election day. So it's exciting. Like November 8th, I'm counting down myself to election day. But I also know November 9th, that is when the canvases are going to start. And so we need to make sure that every ballot is getting counted, knowing that vote by mail increases. So even if people try to announce the results on November 8th, those are not the election results, and we can't be discouraged or just accept those as like, this is what it is, because there's gonna be a ton of mail ballots that still need to be counted. There's also ways to like plug in that process and monitor the canvas and get involved to see that happen and get like that behind the scenes experience. But like even once the canvas happens and election results are announced, this is when you start emailing and really like reaching out to your representative, whether it's the person you voted for or not. As a public official, they work for you. You pay taxes, you buy stuff, so you pay sales taxes. You are a contributing member of this community. So, after the results are out, like that's your time to like reach out to them, tell them your concerns. If you're concerned because there's not working traffic lights in high traffic areas, or there's not bicycle lanes where students are riding their bikes a lot, or that like public transportation is not reliable or working on schedule, or any of the issues that affect your day-to-day life, whether it's you getting to work using public transportation or any of that stuff, that's what you need to reach out and talk about. Like, yes, also reach out to them about internships because they should all have internships and that's a way to get involved too. But when you have these concerns and things that you realize like are not right, like we don't need to sit back and accept those things, but we need to figure out the ways to like either pull students and sign a petition or do an email campaign or a letter campaign because it is their job and their duty to listen to you and your concerns and to work with you on addressing those things in your community.
Is anybody here enrolled in state and local government? What's up? Hey. All right, so this won't be surprising to you, but maybe to some of the listeners who are out there virtually. I think I want to say two things. The first thing I want to say is you hear people talking about politics, and it might be unclear like who we're talking about. So somebody has to fight the power, somebody has to go vote, somebody has to do all the things. And I just want to be clear, I think y'all know this, that we are talking about you. Like you have to go vote. You have to call the elected official. You have to do the things. And if you don't do them, then they might not get them. And so if you don't take anything else away from this, I want you to know that in these conversations that are happening about voting, that are happening about voting rights, we are talking about like you, literally you, doing the things. I'm a Black college graduate, as you heard in the bio, and a part of the kind of culture of FAMU, which I think also exists, but maybe a little bit differently at Howard, is a culture of protest, really. And FAMU protest is usually like outward facing protests. So we will march on the Capitol, or we will go to somebody's office and make demands about things. And I think this shaped my like political understanding, my political way of being, because it became very clear on that campus that when we're talking about rising tuition costs, or when we're talking about, there was this weird law that passed in Tallahassee when I was in school that said no more than 4 people who were unrelated could live in the same house. And it was like, all right, no more than 4 people who are unrelated could live in the same house. Who are y'all talking about? Clearly you're talking about me, right? Like, under what circumstance is it going to be the case that 3 or 4 people who are not related, 5 people who are not related, are living in the same house? If we rented a 6 bedroom house and we want to live together, that's who we're talking about. And so you didn't call out college students directly, but it's clear that you're talking about me. And so the response of the FAMU student is, well, I guess you went to the city council meeting because if you call my name, I'm coming. And so I just want to make sure that you all have that kind of understanding that things are happening all the time that you should be aware of them. Another thing that happened at FAM that I think is useful, and we can debate this a little bit because you all live in Washington, D.C., is being registered to vote where you live. And so you might not know this yet, but some like 50% of y'all who came here from wherever America are going to stay in Washington, D.C. And so even if you are very committed to voting in Florida or very committed to voting in Georgia because you think that they need your votes, I think that's fine for now. But you should also be paying attention to what's happening on the local scene wherever you're in school. If that means that you're at Howard, then be paying attention at Howard. If that means that you are at Jackson State, this thing that's happening with the water doesn't just affect you because you don't have good water, but it might affect you because you'll probably stay somewhere not far off of where your school is. So be paying attention to what's happening in your local community, which I think leads to my last point, which is that all politics is local. You hear all of this stuff about politics, especially during presidential elections. So 2020 was rah, 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 all this stuff about elections, voting is important, democracy on the line, all of that, which is true. But the real like day-to-day life that you live and the things that you experience in your day-to-day life happen at the state and local level. If your water has imbalanced amounts of fluoride so your teeth don't look good, or if they promised you that you would be able to take the Silver Line train to Dallas so you can catch your flight home for Thanksgiving, but they actually not gonna open it up until Christmas, that's a local issue. If you keep getting extra, if you are a tipped wage employee, which is the thing on the ballot here in DC too, and you like the idea of getting a minimum wage instead of getting a tip, that's a local issue. Or if you like the idea of getting a tip instead of a minimum wage, that's a local issue. So all of these little things are happening in your life on a day to day, wherever you are in school. And I would encourage you to be thinking about those things as much as you are thinking about what's happening in these midterm elections. Because generally it's the case that you're going to be voting for a person to go to Congress across the United States, as you just heard. The whole House of Representatives is up for grabs right now. But there are probably also some things happening at the local level that are important for you to be thinking about as well.
Following smart people is always really hard than what you're supposed to say, right? But I'll say a couple things. One, I want to talk about voting rights for a second because I think the Republican Party was so good last cycle at focusing on peeling off 2 to 3% of Black voters, and in particular Black male voters. And the reason why they did that is because around the edges it makes a difference in states like Georgia, where we have some really important national races on the ballot, right? Stacey Abrams is an important race nationally, but also important for Georgia. Raphael Warnock, very important. Pennsylvania, that's true too. If they get 2 or 3% of Black men in particular not to vote, or to vote the other way, they can actually make a huge difference in these elections and the outcomes for what happens in the Senate, for example. And that's a really big deal, right? So one, I want to thank y'all for being here, those out watching in the virtual land. But I'm going to charge you to, when you leave here, really go talk to your friends and family in other states and in DC. I love that you talked about local issues and being engaged in local government. I literally work at every level of government, although not state, because DC is not state, but our council is our state legislature. So if our vote didn't matter, they wouldn't work so hard to keep us from doing it, right? And, we can talk about what's happened in North Carolina where during the redistricting process, they tried to split campuses, split HBCU campus, the HBCU campuses down there to ensure that people couldn't effectively vote as a block. Why did that matter? Because it determines outcomes of statewide elections. It determines local elections. What is politics? What is government? Is how the resources are split up. It is how money gets spent, who is prioritized, what communities are prioritized, literally what neighborhoods are prioritized. And if we are not at the decision-making table, but both as elected officials and leaders and as voters, all of the things that we've seen happen to us historically will continue to happen. This last fight over voting rights, which has been pretty painful in particular, I didn't know for many of us, but certainly for me, we saw businesses, major corporations who historically have been very vocal about voting rights, go silent. Walmart, for example, was one of the strongest supporters of voting rights, which for some might be surprising in years past, right? They didn't do very much this time. Why? Because Republicans have said corporations are people, right? The Supreme Court has said corporations are people. We want your money, your time, your energy when you agree with us, and when we don't, we want you to shut up. How do I know that? Because Ron DeSantis is actively working against his state's own interests by punishing one of the biggest employers in the state. Who? Go. Disney. That never would have happened 10 years ago, right? Democrats are now fighting for business in a way that they have not historically because Republicans have gone so far off the rails. And they're doing it to us, and sometimes we are actually helping them. So what I was saying, I know we're going to get into a good conversation about this, is one, you have got to make sure you and all of your family members vote wherever they are. Now, I would love for you to come register voters in the District of Columbia, because contrary to popular belief, we actually do have some controversial pieces of both referenda and some interesting seats up on the ballot this cycle. But if you don't do it in DC, if you live in Georgia, for example, there's some people who need your votes, and so we want to make sure you're voting there too. But I also want to make sure you're getting to know these issues very well, right? In DC, for example, the tip minimum wage is on the ballot. There are a lot of views about this, a lot of different perspectives about whether that should pass or not pass. Get to understand what the issues are, and not just from the advocacy organizations that are fighting for or against something. Really take the time to learn these issues in the most unbiased way you can so that you really can form your own opinion. I am what they call a business-friendly Democrat. But that doesn't mean I don't support progressive issues. It just means I think we have to have a balance, right? And so I spend a lot of time both educating myself, educating elected officials, and educating people, and sometimes my own family around the dinner table, about why we have to be really thoughtful about how we pursue policy change and the real life impact of it. For example, and I'll stop. The hotel industry in DC is a critically important one, right? They have experienced this. Our tourism numbers have dropped substantially since the pandemic. They were one of the biggest supporters of lifting the mask mandate. Why was that important? They would argue that the mask mandate made it such that people didn't want to come to DC. They felt unsafe staying in hotels. They felt unsafe flying. Other people had a very different opinion, right? Those business decisions, though, that they had to make as a result of that had a big impact on both their bottom line, but also the bottom line of our government and the resources that we have. Why is it important that tourism happen in DC? Because it's taxed, right? If you're driving down the street and you hit a pothole and you bust your tire, well, the city is both responsible, hopefully, for paying for your tire, but also for filling that pothole. But if the city doesn't have the money to do it, they literally can't do it. So there are lots of, the big point, the point I'm making is that there are lots of factors that go into some of these public policy decisions that get made, and the impacts aren't always seen in the most clear way. Your job, our job, is to really make sure that we understand issues before we vote on them, and then that we understand when we're advocating after people get elected.
So there's so much, let's just give them, there's so many issues that we tap into. Of course, I'm a journalist, I'm taking notes for everything, but I want to start with, and we want to make sure to invite our audience members. This is a free-flowing conversation. So if you have questions at any time, we'll allow time as well at the end, but if you have some as we go, just please raise your hand and I'll give you the mic and we can get your questions. But I want to go back to the reason why we're here, we have our college students in the audience and hopefully more that are watching. And we talked about a number of issues, down ballot issues, local issues that are affecting. So, a few weeks ago, we had the Congressional Black Caucus here in town. Some of our students were covering that. I see one in my capstone class over there. I'm calling about in a minute on something else. Say hi. But they covered it. One of the panels I attended was with Roland Martin, who I thought it was great how he called the youth in this election process the canary in the cage. The canary in the cage. The youth are the ones that are holding the answers to what's happening as we go forward. But then again, those strategies that we used in the past of getting the word out there and why these issues matter, they may not have the same relevance to our generation now, our college students let me ask, are there any of those of you who are registered to vote sitting out here in the audience? Okay, that's great to hear. So these hopefully are not, hopefully are the norm and not the exception. But I want to ask you, what strategies must we use now to make sure that our students, our HBCU students, are knowing these issues so that they can affect change by voting in their election, in the election process? And that's for all of you in the community.
I feel like it's a little bit, like maybe we should send a clip of this to the people who need to hear it, because I think they already know.
Right, exactly.
But-
Well, some are watching, maybe some of them need to.
So I use TikTok, much to my own chagrin, because it makes time suck. But I think the answer is like, we have to get off of our high horses a little bit. Like, older people stay talking about, well, you this, or you don't understand, or like, you need to read the news, which I tell them myself. But I think it's important to meet people where they are, all people where they are. And so if I'm on TikTok because my students use TikTok, and I don't wanna be so far away from where they are. Does this mean I have to have a thing on my phone that I'm worried about? Are the Chinese striking? I don't know, right? But
Right.
But do I also wanna be able to engage my students or know what they're humming, if they're humming a sound that's like a viral TikTok sound? Yes, I wanna know. And so I think we just have to be humble if we really want young people to participate. But I think the real gag is they don't want y'all to participate. You out here talking about you want free school, you out here talking about you want to work from home and all of this kind of stuff. Sometimes your interests are not gonna be aligned with older people's interests. They want you to go into the office because they have a lease, and the lease specifies that they have this space for 20 years and they already spent the money, so you need to show up at work. This is separate from what you want to do, which is work at your house, right? And so sometimes I think there's a bit of a disconnect because we don't approach you all with humility, but sometimes there's a bit of a disconnect because we just disagree on stuff.
Yeah, I think all that's right. I have a TikTok account. I look at TikTok videos. I have not yet made one. Maybe one day. I don't think I can do it. I think a couple things. I'm very motivated by meeting people where they are and really understanding exactly what issues motivate them. Now, what is true is when I was younger and in college, I had a very different set of views that have changed since I have changed and grown. When you own things, your position and perspective about things change. It's just a fact. I was going to say this line that I say when I train candidates, but I'm not going to curse because I don't know who's out there. But when you have stuff, you give a kitty, and when you don't, sometimes you care less. You care about different things, right? So one, I think getting clear about both what is motivating people that you disagree with and what motivates people you agree with is really important, right? If you are motivated by free college, if you are motivated by access to fair and affordable housing, right? You have to understand all the aspects of the argument. And look, it is not hard to find information, right? The internet was like not quite a real thing when I was in college, right? I'm dating myself so much, but I'm 43, it just had become, we just got email at that point, right? You literally have information at your fingertips. Now, the hard part is discerning the information and figuring out what is accurate, and sometimes even, no disrespect to those who are journalists in the room or becoming journalists, sometimes the news is just wrong. Their facts are not completely accurate or they're not provided in appropriate context. And so again, this is to my earlier point, where you have to really spend the time digging to understand it. The system is set up for you not to understand it. They don't want you to be active. And I'm not talking about this sort of non-existent day. If you live in the state of Florida, or Georgia, Mississippi, even some places in the north as well, there's an active effort to get you to, one, not vote, and two, not learn or understand the issues or how government operates. They do that for a reason. Because if we actually voted, all in the block that we are, if we actually understood the issues and got deeply involved and engaged in policy, the things that have happened could not happen, right? So I think what we all have to be focused on collectively is when we learn something about a set of issues, we gotta make sure we share that, right? And that's why I love the music so much. Y'all follow the music? Oh, she's too old for y'all already.
Parking lot Friday.
Parking lot, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, she's, no? Well, follow her because she breaks down public policy issues with historical context.
Say who that is again.
What is her real name? She went to Spelman, she's Spelman grad. I need to look up her Instagram, thank you. But one of the things that I love is she makes it super accessible. She explains the issue, she provides literally decades, sometimes centuries worth of history to help people understand exactly how we got there. Super fun, really pithy way. And she's gotten incredibly popular because she's able to communicate these very complicated issues. Now, I don't always completely agree with her public policy solutions, but I always am blown away by how quickly and easily she's able to dissect an issue and make it accessible to people who may not follow these issues. The other thing is, I want you all to sit and really think about what you prioritize. What is really, really important to you? What set of issues drive you? There are lots of ways to get involved in politics. One, you can vote. Two, you can vote and work for elected officials. You can become an elected official. You can become an appointed official. You can become a lobbyist. I've done almost all of those things, right? But you have to know both the why you're doing it and what you want to change or improve. And that means you have to understand what is happening at the very local level in your own community, but also at the national level as well. What's also important is understanding who is responsible for what. People think for some reason that the president fills potholes, right? Or sometimes they think that local city councils control education, and sometimes they do, in some cities they do, but in some cities they do not. In DC, for example, the schools are run by the mayor. The DC council has oversight. So if you have a problem with the schools, you want to talk to the mayor. But in some places you want to talk to the school board, right? State legislatures appropriate money and provide oversight, right? But they don't actually execute laws. So for example, if you're upset about not having a stop sign on your corner, you can call your council member or your member of Congress to talk about that. But the executive branch of the government actually has the responsibility for putting that stop sign there. So it's also important that you know who is responsible for what, so you don't waste your time targeting elected officials who actually cannot be helpful to you or solve the problem.
So I'm going 1+1, everything that was said. But just to build off of some of the things that were said, I think the idea that you can run for office, don't think of that as a 10-year plan.
Nope.
I know a lot of college students who ran for office in like city council while they were still enrolled as full-time students. So like, don't think of that like, oh, I'll get to that after I graduate. You can do that now. But I think the other important thing is like, one of the things that like I know we're all guilty of, even myself as working in the nonprofit sector, is we like to use a lot of jargon when we talk about the issues, and like we don't make the information accessible. Like we know between family members, friends, like not everyone has a political science degree and is going to understand when we're talking about why like having the stop sign is important and why we need to go through these certain channels. No, like we have to learn how to communicate accessible. And I think one of the key things, I know you mentioned like the Instagram account, that could be your account. You all, like it's not our role to convince you and your peers to vote and to make it like more exciting for your peers and like other Gen Zers. That's your job. It is more impactful. And you all text 5 people and ask them to go vote, they're gonna do it before when I text them or when a campaign texts them. So it's also your job to figure out like how to create a TikTok that you know is viral and share information. Because we know like a lot of Gen Z is getting a lot of their like political and policy information through TikTok now. It doesn't matter how many times we share a Wall Street Journal article, it's not going to hit the same way as if they see a face or a person that seems similar to them in age and identity saying that same information. So I think it's not necessarily how we feel or how we think or what we think needs to be done. What do you all think needs to be done to get your friends to vote? The other thing is, don't vote alone.
That's right.
Like, you should never go vote alone, whether you're voting by mail or if you're voting in person. Get your friends with you. Some of them may need a witness signature too, so make sure like y'all are all there together and take your ballots to the post office or go vote in person. Like, never go vote by yourself.
I want to follow up on that, and I want to hear from some of our members of the audience, some of whom I know are doing things on this campus to make sure the students are getting the information on voting. And I also want to come back to fake news, because you know I got something to say about that. But before we get to that, I want to talk, piggybacking on making sure that our youth are aware and Gen Z are aware of the issues that are surrounding us. So in the past elections, particularly, well, a lot of people say that Bill Clinton was the first black president. Now, I can go way back to those days, but we know that President Obama effectively used social media when he was campaigning. We saw a lot of celebrities come, to play. We saw the rap artists, the entertainment, the athletes. We're not seeing that same drive right now collectively to urge this generation to get out and vote. Do you think, or what do you think, I would ask, should be happening with those influencers, so to speak? We just had homecoming. You mentioned, who was the guest? I know Hallie and Chloe, and who was it, Florilla or someone? Yard, you couldn't get on the yard, could you, Dr. Grant? On Friday, you can't even get on there. It's the word of who's gonna appear. But when it's something that matters, when it's something important that can affect their lives, it's crickets, right? And so what should we, or what do you think our influencers should be doing now to make sure that our younger folks are knowing the issues and exercising them? Any thoughts? If they should.
Yeah, I think a couple things. I think, look, life is hard, right? It is, and inflation is high, and people are broke, and it is hard, and people want to escape from those things. I want to. Last night I was up watching something I had no business watching. I literally was catching up on my reality television, right? And it's thoughtless, and it's easy, and I don't have to think too hard, and I can judge people, and it's awful, right? But I need that escape too. I want artists and influencers to do more and to be more engaged. And the truth is, there are a lot that are. We have seen, this is really the power of TikTok and the gram. There are all sorts of influencers now talking politics and history and putting it all in a historical context that is critically important. And the number of Black influencers doing this, unreal, right? To me, that's super exciting. But I think the point earlier is a really important one. You all are influencers, right? There are a group of people who listen to and care about what you have to say. And I'll be honest with you, I love our celebrities, right? I love when they are engaged deeply in social justice. I quote that Jesse Williams speech about how we're magic all the time when I'm giving talks, particularly to Black young people. But the truth is, there's never been a celebrity that got me to do anything. Except maybe buy a t-shirt or a pair of shoes, like that's possible. I've had my fair share of Jennies, right? But there aren't many that have actually made me vote. That doesn't mean that they should be vocal. They are citizens of this country as well, right? They have to care about these issues as well. But again, sometimes I think we put too much pressure on people that we see, famous people and celebrities, and we really should be putting that pressure on people in our own communities, right? If you live in a community that has experienced a significant spike in violence and you don't have anything to say about it, that is a problem. If you are not talking to your elected officials about it, that is a problem. If you are not thinking about running for office to solve these problems, that is a problem. And while they should be deeply engaged and involved, Kerry Washington, as much as I love her, and she's super involved, doesn't live in DC. She doesn't know the direct issues that are impacting me and my community and my family who live in this community. That doesn't mean she can't speak to them. I want her to. But really, I need my cousins talking to each other about this stuff. too. It's not either or, and not mutually exclusive, but sometimes we put a little too much pressure on public figures because then what happens is what we're seeing again. I hate to keep bringing up Kanye, but we're seeing what's happening with him, right? His influence is outsized, and it should not be. He has no clue what he's talking about. Not to mention all the other, other issues that he should be really focused on right now, right? But there are certainly people following him and hanging on every word he says when they could be talking to their neighbors and their family and their friends about how these issues deeply impact them at home, and really coming together to decide how they're going to use their power to vote, as opposed to listening to that craziness.
You want to add anything to that? I just think personally, if they had a voting rights rally when we had Yard Fest, they could have made a big impact. That's all I'm saying. There was a question from the audience, and you can introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Jason Pantorado. I'm a senior journalism major, Afro-American Studies minor from the Bronx, New York. And so I definitely agree with everything you just said. Uh, in the sense that it can be dangerous when you look at like a comedy, in the sense that if they are completely ignorant, then they could potentially be swaying it and on the ignorant side, and that's why obviously education is so important. But honestly, I have like no tolerance or like give no excuses for all the celebrities that have influence over young people not having a voice and doing it, like Little Baby or the Baby, any baby that's out there. They all like 18-year-old men and women that follow these people so deeply. And if they wouldn't just, they could easily just have a post or talk about these issues, and it would have so much influence. And I just think that I definitely agree with Professor Thomas, for instance, like all the young people we saw in the yard, there was like a voting rights, a voting rally during that time that could have given so much awareness and gotten so many people involved. I was literally on the yard a couple of weeks ago for a few hours, just making sure I was talking to as many students as I saw and telling them about vote.org and making sure they had all the information for their state, because we have a ridiculous amount of students from these important states like Texas, Florida, Georgia, and stuff. And while I do, on one hand, like realize that a lot of them aren't living in, when you think about like the redistricting and how they give the power to like more white communities and stuff. I know a lot of our young black students don't like live in those areas, but still, we know as a fact that not all of them just live in the big cities and stuff. We know as a fact that if young people in general voted in that capacity, young black people, young people, period, we would not be on any of these issues, as you guys said. That's why like, the argument I was making to them always, I definitely agree with your point about the jargon and not, spending too much time, being so, I guess, eloquent in the way you're talking about it. I literally just say, I would say like, Roe v. Wade is just the beginning. Everything would, if the wrong people, if the GOP get power, they're going to take away as many women's rights, black people's rights, civil rights, LGBTQ, everything we're seeing with climate change and gun reform and, gun laws and all that stuff. If they get in power, they're going to take us back to as far as they possibly can, and just making it very plain, clear to them what was at stake, and that if young people like them voted in the capacity, we would not be dealing with any of these things. And see it also.
I also have Jason is one of the e-board members for Howard University, the award-winning Howard University Association. Like John said, they did have a voter registration drive on campus recently. There was another question.
So like I heard when you brought up like Little Baby and the Baby, and I want to just go back to your point because like when you really in politics every day, sometimes you do need that place where you can just forget about it. And like I know although we do want our influencers sometimes to like always talk about it, when you're in it every day though, sometimes you do just need a break where you can just go and you can just clear the space out and just be somebody different. Because I have a hard time separating work from personal life as well. And I feel like that is probably my issue because like it's like how do you separate them? So I do understand that point like very, very well. And I thank you for sharing it because it's okay to go hit me up, it makes sense. But also like I'm sorry, I don't know things by heart. But you also talked about how the male people, how they don't have enough workers to work the booths and stuff. And I look, like for my bid, like for businesses, you can create a digital mailbox. But it's only 4 states that don't allow you to create a digital mailbox as a permanent company address. So I feel like if it was a way that we could swing around and make companies say, hey, let me build a digital mailbox and pretty much give everybody a digital mailbox in a sense, that probably could be a way to increase vote by mail and make sure that's done more efficiently as well.
I like that you're thinking that way. And the political scientists, among other people who are thinking about how to increase the number of individuals who vote, are on it, right? They're already thinking about, like, why do we vote in person? Like, why don't we just send it in via the internet? And it's a big debate. But I think the question has to continue to be asked in order to finally get there one day. So will it happen in my lifetime? I think so. When, I don't know. I want to highlight something Ms. Snowden said that I feel like was really important, and I hope y'all didn't miss it. And I think maybe a theme for today is that we are literally talking to you. So I can't find a woman's Instagram list of a Black woman who does these very thoughtful analyses of policy issues. I found her via Instagram. I don't know where she started, in the parking lot on Fridays. And I think that when we talk about, like, who should spread this information, you should. So she is now an influencer. And I think if you know her, then you will go and say, well, I wonder what she has to say about Roe v. Wade, or I wonder what she has to say about this thing or that thing when the things happen. And I'm trying to put forward to you that a part of the point of being at college, as my friend Andrew would say, is to bring that college home, right? Like, you are here to get this information. I imagine that most of y'all have something in mind about, like, getting a good job, but, like, also you can take things that you are learning and take them home. But and I think if you do that in a way that is humble, not like, oh, I got all this education, y'all better listen to me, but very much like, this is what I know, here's what I'm sharing, take it or leave it. I think you all really can be the change you want to see. The girl in the yellow dress on TikTok did a whole thing with Stacey Abrams. It was the first time I left a comment on TikTok, so I was like, good job, girl, like, I'm very excited about this. But I don't know if the average person's gonna see the girl in the yellow dress and be like, oh, now I'm about to vote for Stacey Abrams, right? Like, you have to know some other stuff about what was happening to know who that was and why to be excited that she danced on the bus with Stacey Abrams, right? And so I think what I'm trying to say, again, just to be very clear, you all should be the people who are creating this content. And if you do it really well, then you will be a person who we are searching through Google to try to find you next to. Her Instagram name is Lene, Lynaeevanee. And she got a blue check.
What is it, Lene, what?
Lene Vanee, Vanee. Check her out.
You want to add in?
Just, not to go into the weeds of vote by mail and like all the stuff behind it, but like there are some states that found solutions to mail problems.
Yeah.
They created vote by mail drop boxes, which means like, no matter like where you live, you didn't have to remember where to go to cast your ballot. You just look for the big drop box, and it was also something that was like secure. The Board of Elections picked it up daily. But the other like amazing thing about these drop boxes, they could be inside of jails, which means that those people who have the right to vote can still cast their ballot and not worry about like, is my mail going to be sent out on time? You also like vote by mail rules across states is so weird because it's like it has to be postmarked by this day. Oh no, it has to be received by November 8th. And like those laws can change all the way up as we get closer to election day. So there are like some solutions, but it's just that those solutions are in your places like DC and Maryland has drop boxes. I live in North Carolina, we don't have drop boxes. And so there are like ways to address it and make it more accessible. It's just a matter of getting those policies changed and figuring out like the whole pathway of it. So you do have to start that in some of your general assemblies. And then you also have to make sure that the Board of Elections is on board with it because they have to implement it. The Board of Elections can say like, you know, we did a study, we did research, we don't have money to create these drop boxes and to make sure they're secure. So they can like say, we need another year. And that another year could become another year. And that now you're waiting 5 years for something that became law 5 sessions ago. So it's still trying to navigate how to make it actually get implemented. Because a lot of times we do get good laws and stuff passed, but the implementation is where stuff starts to get a little sketchy, get a little skewed.
Well, I know we have another question, but I just wanted to follow up on some of you talked about, people being able to vote in jails. And I think I just saw just yesterday perhaps, Florida Governor DeSantis had a woman was arrested outside of her home.
12 people.
Yes, 12.
Yeah.
12. They talked to one of them who was handcuffed and arrested because she voted. And it was part of their crackdown, against voter fraud, right? And, someone told her she could vote, she was a felon, some people are jailed, once they've served their time, should be allowed to vote. And these are these tactics, there's just new twist on tactics of old that we read about, that my father, who was in civil rights in Mississippi with Medgar Evers getting folks out to vote, dealt with. Now we see a new face with that. And there are many more examples, that we can talk about from across the country. And you referenced some, Alyssa, about getting in spaces so we can right these wrongs. But what are the simple things to do? So for those who are sitting here in the audience, wanting to become engaged and hear these stories, what would you recommend is the best way to start to get involved? And then we'll come to your question.
They hate when their phone voicemail box is full. So get all your friends and your family who live in their district, because if they don't live in their district, it doesn't matter, to make phone calls or send emails. Because if I send an email to my representative right now, it's gonna be like, okay, this little girl from Winston sent an email, cool. But if I can get myself, who I know live in that district, my mom who lives in that district, some of my mom's friends, and make it to where it's 5 emails about that one thing, that is how you start getting change, because it's gonna be more noticeable. Even if it is like the example of a stop sign. If it's 5 people who say that we don't feel safe walking in our neighborhood because there's not a stop sign and there's bad traffic flow, you're gonna be able to start working towards that stop sign. But if it's just one person, unfortunately, a lot of them can easily ignore 1, but they can't ignore 5. And then I think beyond doing phone calls and emails, a lot of time your elected officials shop at the same grocery store as you. So have their picture saved in your phone so you can be like, is that them? Let me just roll up real quick while they're picking out their milk or whatever. Or if you work at a grocery store at a restaurant, they might come in and frequent that business. So they work for you, even if, they don't really like it to be interrupted, but my life is being inconvenienced because I don't have access to what I need. So excuse me, while you're at dinner, I have this problem and I sent you an email about it and I'm just gonna let you know this is what it is, this is my name, I'm gonna email you again. You can also go to their offices. Their offices are publicized on their website. A lot of your Congress members are now at home campaigning for the election, so they're all in their home districts. You can easily figure out where their office is. You can schedule meetings. You may not always get a meeting with a member of Congress, but a lot of times it's their staff that's really the ones helping guide policy. It's not always the actual member, the chief of staff, the education policy director. If you have an issue with education, you don't need to speak to the member of Congress. Speak to his education research staffer, because that's the person who's going to be have a pulse on that issue and can also really understand where your concerns are coming from. Oh, and Twitter. Get them on Twitter.
Yeah.
Yes.
Really get them on Twitter.
About Twitter, that's my.
Every elected official that has a social media account pays attention to it, or someone in their office does. In some cases, the actual elected monitors it very, very closely, and it makes a difference. Twitter is not the real world, as many of you know, but elected officials and journalists are very focused on Twitter. So when I want to find breaking news or I want to figure out what's going on, sometimes Twitter is my first stop, okay? I have a little difference of opinion about going to people's houses and bothering them in the grocery store because I was an appointed official and people used to come to my house all the time, knock my door, all sorts of stuff. Remember, elected officials and appointed officials are people, as are their families. So if you do that, please try as hard as you can to be respectful. Here's an important point though. Emails and phone calls are really important. Social media, communicating that way is also really important. There's nothing worth more than a handwritten letter. Sounds crazy, because who does that anymore, right? But a handwritten letter is worth like 100 form letters, right? Everyone's got these emails from whatever organization they signed up on a list for. It's a form email that goes, those get batched in a pile, they get put in, they get a form letter back. A handwritten letter, someone actually, it's all read, but a handwritten letter is taken usually a little bit more seriously than a form email from an organization with the same text. So be really mindful of that. The other thing, elected officials, depending upon where they are, don't have large staffs, right? So one thing to note is who is actually doing the work. So for example, in the Maryland State Legislature, I believe the staff, they usually have one, at most, maybe two staff. I know that's certainly true in South Carolina, for example. So anytime you can help an elected official by doing some of the research work, the legislative work, or thinking through a concept for them, that's actually really helpful, super powerful, and you can have a real and sort of quick impact on a problem. The other thing I would say, and I like to tell this story because it's really the power of local government, which is different than state and national government. When I was deputy mayor, I was in a room a lot like this at a community forum where we were talking about returning citizen issues, right? And this guy, I'm talking about all the workforce programs in DC, all the things we're doing to help get people connected to work here, in particular returning citizens. This guy stands up and he says, Deputy Mayor, I went to the wall, I served to the wall. I didn't know what that meant. I served all 16 years of my time. I got my GED, I got my associate's degree, I got every certification I could get in that prison. I can literally build a house with my bare hands and I cannot get a job. What are you gonna do for me? And I stood there and I was like, that's a good question. And I said, brother, you're doing the wrong thing. You need to stop looking for a job. You need to start your own business. Next morning, I went to my office and said, we're going to create a program that pays returning citizens to start their own business because most of our returning citizens were already business owners. Legitimate business owners, but business owners nonetheless, right? So we did that. We took our project empowerment program, which puts returning citizens through a training program. We pay them while they're in a training program. We connect them to subsidized employment. We took those same resources and built a program called Aspiring Entrepreneurship, which paid returning citizens to write their business plan, start their own business, and help them get licensed and in some cases get connected to city contracts. Why does that matter? We built more than 13 businesses that hired more than 40 people that had millions of dollars in revenue and primarily hired returning citizens. That's the power of local government. And that federal government, Congress doesn't move that quickly, right? But in DC, we have a lot of resources. We have some innovation and creativity. We have a mayor who's very, very focused on pushing the envelope and doing things differently. And we were able to stand that up for $50,000 in less than 3 months. Think about the impact there, right? So as you both think about how to access information, think about, and both how to access information, but more importantly, help people solve problems. Think about the real problems that impact your life every day. The solutions aren't always super difficult, won't always take 15 years to implement. I know I'm a little off topic, but I want you to be thoughtful about this stuff, particularly as, now I'm back to voting rights, people are actively working to take your vote away, right? And so this actually responds to more directly to the question. Go to your Board of Elections website, figure out what you need to vote. It's different in every single state, sometimes in jurisdictions within states, right? Florida is such a tricky state to vote in. I didn't believe it until I worked an election in Florida and watched them turn this woman away who had been voting every year since it was legal for her to vote. Right? She was like a 98-year-old black woman. They sent her out, I sent her back in the polling location, they sent her out, I sent her back in. She ended up having to file a provisional ballot. Who knows if that ballot got counted or not, right? So make sure you know the law before you go vote. Make sure you know exactly what you have to do for your mail-in ballot. Does it need to be notarized? Does a witness need to sign it? Do you need to sign the outside of the envelope versus the inside of the ballot? All of, I have found, I'd be interested in political scientists here and an advocate on this, but I have found that states that really don't want us to vote put more and more barriers in place for that to happen. So in DC, it's very easy to vote. You can go to a drop box, you can vote the same day. You don't even have to go to your polling precinct anymore to vote. You can go to any precinct and vote. We want you to vote in DC. We want you to be active. Every jurisdiction isn't like that. So really, really spend the time understanding what the law is and make sure you tell people. You can have a voting party, right, on election day, take everybody to vote with you, or when you go vote, if you vote early or vote by mail, have a party, everyone bring their ballot over. Because the other piece is some of these ballot initiatives in states that have them are super confusing. they're written in such a way that sometimes it's not exactly clear how you should vote. And so spending the time both looking at advocacy organizations that you agree with and how they recommend that you vote, and talking to people who understand the issues and getting their opinion about how they should vote, and then educating your friends and literally having parties where you fill this stuff out together, also a really useful exercise to help make sure both your friends vote and you actually get your best vote. The other thing is, if you're working an election, make sure you also go vote, right? So this has happened to me, and I will admit this publicly. In 2008, we had a pretty significant presidential election, right? I voted in the primary in the District of Columbia. I was in Colorado working the election. My ballot did not come. I did not vote for Obama in 2008, the general election. Yeah, right? But when I run a campaign, I always make sure the volunteers find time to go vote, so make sure you do that too.
So what, I think the other thing I would add to what you just said, sample ballots are public and online right now. So like print off your sample ballot, because a lot of states, if you go in with your sample ballot on your phone, you're gonna get in trouble because you have your phone out. So print it off. Hopefully, I know a lot of college campuses offer free printing, so if you're a student, maybe there's like free printing somewhere and you have a printing budget. But another resource that I always recommend people, the League of Women Voters has vote411.org. And that you type in your address or where you're registered, it brings up your sample ballot, but also it brings up the candidates and what they say on a number of issues. And these are like, they send out questionnaires to everyone, so these are like direct responses. Not everyone fills it out, so you may have candidates that didn't respond, but it would at least also not only show you your candidates, but also a lot of the ballot referendums, they'll have like the background information on that too. So it's very, I think I use it probably every election, because North Carolina has one of the longest ballots, I think. But it's a great resource, and it's also nonpartisan, so it shouldn't persuade anybody one way or the other. There was something else you said. A simple ballot is going to be exactly what you, when you walk into the polling precinct, it's going to be a version of that that's public and online right now. So you can't walk in with your sample ballot and like, hey, here's my ballot, but it's going to be a copy of that that's public and online. Your Board of Elections will have it on their website. Like I said, Vote411 has like a digitalized version of it. A lot of other organizations will have publicized versions of it. But it's, so when you walk in, there's no surprises. Because a lot of times there's like random positions that you don't even realize you vote for. Like you vote for like your soil and water person sometimes. You like, this election, you're just gonna vote for a lot of those positions that are local, that are as like glamorous or as well known as your like council members and things like that.
And it just really does help you, so you're not walking in there blind, you know what to expect. We did have a question, we have less than 10 minutes, and we wanna make sure to answer you.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so
You can say your name.
yeah, sorry, I don't have intro. So my name is Chanel. I'm a senior journalism major, political science minor from New York City. So voting isn't as difficult in my state. I don't have any issues there. One thing I did want to say is somebody that I do follow is I Am Legally Hype on TikTok. She's amazing. She's a lawyer, but she puts in like AABE, what's going on with like what's happening in the White House, just different policies and things like that. All of this, stuff around voting and all of that. So I follow her the way she speaks. And then also another thing is it is as you guys are saying, really important to bring your friends with you and educate your friends. Something I learned in my customer service positions is positioning is important. And so literally just 2 days ago, I was telling my friends like, hey, because they kind of like real lackluster when it comes to voting, like, oh, it doesn't really count, or they don't really understand. And so what I had to position is, how much do you guys care about women, right? Like, some of my friends have daughters, mothers, sisters, right? Me, right? How much do you care about me? Okay, please understand that things such as Roe v. Wade are on the line. So positioning is very important when it comes to educating your friends. I just would definitely keep that in mind. And then my question was, does anybody understand what they mean when they say slavery is on a ballot in different states? Because I was trying to understand what that is for real and how I can tell my friends how important it is to vote in those states.
Dr. Grant.
I would need more context for a specific thing, but I will listen to you. That's right. For slavery online. So If I am pregnant and I don't want to be pregnant, pregnancy is hard.
Yes.
There are like long swaths of time when you just straight up sick. What does it mean for you to force me to carry a pregnancy that I don't want to carry?
Let alone raise the baby after it's here.
And you're not gonna give me
Without
money
resources.
I just think about bootstraps, right? Like, what does that mean? What does it mean? I'm gonna show my DC hand now. What does it mean for me to go to work and make $5 an hour, but I'm the only Black server at the fancy restaurant, so people don't leave me tips, but they leave her a bunch of tips? Should I get paid the same amount? Like, is this some kind of, slavery is a big word. We talk about enslaved people, you have to be a little bit careful, but like, I think that people are trying to highlight that there are these various ways that people are not free in American society, and that freedom is on the ballot, so to speak. So if it is the case that the Supreme Court allows for the end of Roe v. Wade, and Clarence Thomas said out of his mouth very clearly, we coming for same-sex marriage next, we coming for contraception. What does it mean not to be able to do what you want to do in a society? And are you about to vote for a person who is going to limit your rights or what you believe your rights should be? I think that's probably the broadest way to explain it.
I agree. And I'm gonna give y'all a quick lesson on how two very smart, thoughtful people can disagree on an issue. Ready? Here we go. So, just to clarify some information with the tip minimum wage, every server, everyone in a restaurant or as a tip worker is guaranteed minimum wage. They are in fact paid minimum wage. They also work for tips. On average in DC, because we don't have a lot of chain restaurants, right? Servers make between $25 and $50 an hour. Many servers strongly oppose a change to tip minimum wage. Many don't, but many do. This is why you have to get fully educated about an issue and not deal with it from half, and not only listen to a particular setback, because I'm not suggesting that you have not done that. One. Two, now I want to give you some additional context for an issue like that. Think about the costs associated with starting a business. Restaurants have a margin of 4 to 5% if they're doing really well, which is why chain restaurants do better because they have bigger margins. If it costs more to start a business as wages increase, we all agree minimum wage should be, I think minimum wage should be even higher than it is, even though DC has very high minimum wage, right? But that also creates barriers for people who have been overlooked, underserved, and underrepresented, right? Because now the cost of me creating my first business is more expensive. So I just launched a business 2 years ago, right? If I have to pay $15 or $30 an hour minimum wage, that means my labor costs significantly increase. We can debate what minimum wage should be, but the fact is, I've got to confront that issue too, right? As a business owner. So a Black person trying to start a business today it's more expensive for them to do that today than it was before. We have less access to capital, they flow to us less. We typically don't have families that have significant amounts of money that can support us. So in thinking about that, if I'm guaranteed minimum wage and I'm a tip worker, and restaurants are required to pay, and I can make more money in tips with the share of the labor cost, does it make it easier for Black and brown folks to start restaurants in a city like DC? Yes. How do you balance that against this bigger issue around the tip minimum wage? That is the context that people have to be thinking about. All there are 360 degrees of solutions here, right? And someone is going to be impacted by that. And so the question is who and how, and what population of people are you most interested? Not what population is the wrong framing. How do you who should the burden fall to for that? And that's the question that you got to think about when you think about these public policy issues.
Well, when we talk about, and we only have a couple of minutes left, but I do feel I have to add, so it's so important as we hear a lot of our panelists talk about context. And I think, and I go back to what we said earlier, that's why it is important, I feel, for to have a fair press that's reporting to explain these issues and to break it down and to say why it matters, what the issues are, who it affects, especially when it comes to these issues that pertain to our communities. And I know our students, Yana is one of them. What is your issue that you're covering for the midterm election?
Georgia's Senate race.
So she's doing that, so we're covering all the issues, several issues as much as we can. And Howard is doing full court press on election night with all of our students in media journalism and film, so stay tuned to that. We only literally have 1 minute left. Is this a question or a comment? Yes, we have 1 minute.
It was just to clarify, Chanel's commission on the slavery on the ballot.
Uh-huh.
But also real quickly, what you just said was really important. That's why I think people should follow Scrolling Martin Unfiltered. That's Black-owned media. It's on a digital news show every weekday. He has Dr. Greg Carr on every Thursday. But Black professionals talking about the issues, breaking it down, explaining why it affects Black people. It's in the spirit of the Black press. That was so important to the Black community. It's what we need because while a lot of mainstream news and stuff can be helpful and it is important, there's obviously so much disinformation that we get from social media and so much things. So that's why Black-owned media, like Global Environment, is so important for Black people. But to answer Chanel's question about slavery on the ballot, that story is specifically referring to 5 states, Louisiana, Oregon, Tennessee, Alabama, and Vermont, where they have something that's going to be decided on whether involuntary servitude will still be technically included for prisons. That will be decided. So technically, obviously, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery except for prisons. So that's what that decision is on the ballot for.
And we have, and I'm sorry, we're almost out of time. I want to recognize Brother Rebecca.
No, thank you.
Oh, is that it? Okay. Brother over here.
I used to work with my local housing authority, and I kind of did what I call dirty work. I did like open the mail, and I did check the voicemail boxes. And I will say that is the best way to get at the head leaders. I say mail probably number 1 because that is like a different level of commitment. But also the phone calls that I really paid attention to was the same voices I heard over and over. Like it was one lady, she called at 8 o'clock in the morning, and she called at 4 o'clock at night every day. We didn't check our voicemails every day. So on Friday at the end of the week, you got all these voicemails, and then every time you click through them, you keep hearing the same voice, which means that one person has officially got all my attention. So the best way is through mail and that phone call. Personally.
Well, I want to thank all of you. Let's thank our panelists for being here. We have so much more that we could have talked about, but the important thing is that we're here to talk about the issues, regardless of whether you're red, blue, purple, or green. We will hope that you exercise your right to vote on November 8th and encourage all your friends. We thank you for your time here. We thank you for having this session, Voting Rights Matter, Mobilizing the HBCU vote in 2022 and beyond. You all stay safe and God bless. Thank you for being here.
I want to get a picture real quick on the floor.
Alice, you want to take a real quick picture?
Can I also just make one quick announcement before everyone walks out? So Common Cause organization I work for, we have a program this year called Stories of Democracy, where you all can contribute written or video content, and we're giving people, I think it's either $150 or $200 stipends for your content, and we're gonna help publish it and like shop it around. So I know y'all are journalism students, so if you need a little bit of like extra money coming from homecoming, feel free to take one of these flyers or go to storiesofdemocracy.com and you can learn about it over there.
Thank you. Oh, I'm taking it. Thank you. Thank you guys so much. Good to see you.